So you and I have both been on the internet, working on the internet for a long time, since I guess the kind of early, I would call it the early Web 2 era of like the early 2000s. I guess, I think people know your background, but it would be interesting to hear a little bit about your journey, and particularly how you got excited about NFTs and Web3, and just how you decided to start Proof and Moonbirds.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I've been following all things crypto for quite some time. Just playing around with Bitcoin in the very early days, and then Ethereum in the very early days. And I just found an old podcast actually yesterday. A friend sent me. It was 9 years ago, and it was Tim Ferriss and I were on a podcast together talking about Ethereum. And I said, oh, it's this weird coin I don't want to talk about. And he's like, come on, talk about it. I was like, it's called Ethereum. And like, little did I know that this was going to be as big as it eventually became. But it was like, I just like shrugged it off as no big deal back then. It was so funny to see how times have changed. And I also mentioned Dogecoin back then, which is crazy that was even around 9 years ago. Yeah. And now meme coins are all the thing, which is just crazy that it's coming full circle again. But it's always just been, for me, experimenting and playing. I think that any great builder, we're tinkers. We're people that want to just play and kick the tires on any new technology in the earliest days. And so that led me, there was no skill involved in this, but it led me to minting some of the original CryptoPunks when they came out. And so no one was calling them NFTs. It was like, oh, this is kind of like a weird way to put, art on the blockchain. Yeah. Okay, these are funny little characters, like, why not? And so I immediately lost the keys for the wallet and later figured out how to recover them.
That was pre-CryptoKitties too, I think?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So, and then CryptoKitties came, and then there was this period of nothing. Yeah. And it was like, a year and a half, 2 years or something. And then all of a sudden I remember thinking like, oh, somebody's like, hey, have you checked out Art Blocks? And I was like, what is that? And I just happened to be running in those circles again. And friends that tell you when something's cool and you should go check it out. And so I immediately thought, well, this space has changed. Super Rare's out there now. Like, I started noticing a lot of great digitally native artists coming online that weren't producing art anywhere else. It wasn't like, you have up here before was Pace, and Pace is obviously top tier, a traditional art house, onboarding traditional artists into the digital space now and working in collaboration with Art Blocks and others. We did a drop with them here a couple months ago. And but this was I swear I'll turn off these notifications. This was something where I had seen like artists that were coming into the space that had, for 1 hour, there we go, that had essentially were creating like living, breathing art that hadn't been captured in a way before. And so generative art always, in my mind, had been something where you pop into a gallery in San Francisco, every once in a while you'll see something cool going on, you're like, okay, but that's going to break, right? And so now all of the encapsulated JavaScript and everything was sort of on chain, perfect proven provenance around where the stuff was originally created and who created it. A lot of these things just started clicking in my mind. I was like, well, this is fun to where I should probably spend some more time here. Yeah. And so that led to a podcast, and that led to me, thinking about NFT as a membership club, launching the Proof Collective around that. That went quite well. And then saying, well, gosh, no one wants to have a badge as their identity. They want to have an icon of something on Twitter. So that led us to creating Moonbirds, and that was just, then we were off to the races, and it was all the chaos that came after that.
So can you explain then just a little bit, so Proof is the difference between Proof and Moonbirds, I guess?
So the Proof kind of pass started off as 1,000 members to have access to really our best content first. So it was at the point in time where we talk about a project and the floor would rise if we talked about it on the podcast. That many people were paying attention to like the podcast. And so, we're like, okay, you get early access to the podcast. You get a token gated community on Discord that is just for like-minded collectors. You get curated drops. So we'd work with artists to do drops, and we had a product called Grails that we put out there that's done quite well. So it was really just, can we create this like little private club of the world's top collectors? And that worked out quite well. And it was just crazy because, that pass sold out at 1 ETH. And it was a Dutch auction. And eventually, in the heyday, it was worth a little over $400,000 a pass, which was just insanity. Yeah. and you had no control over that. There was nothing we could do to control that price. And you don't want to be the person on Twitter being like, I think this is worth a little too much. Like, you can't ever
Well,
say
at
that.
that price, it undermined the kind of purpose of it, right? Which
Right.
is supposed to be a curator's club, but not so expensive that it's...
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when you think of like the world's top private clubs as they stand today, you think of like the ones that are scalable, like Soho House, or there's a handful of these. There's a few in Napa Valley, and you think about what are the membership costs and what are the prices associated. And this is like an order of magnitude larger than like the world's best private clubs. You're like, okay, something's out of whack here.
Yeah.
This doesn't feel right. So that was. But then we couldn't have really anticipated what happened with Moonbirds. Moonbirds was just a free drop to these users, and then we sold some of them as well.
And Moonbirds is different because it's a profile picture.
Yeah, it was
project
just a PFP that we wanted to launch and do some associated benefits with it as well, and just have it be trait-based rewards. And it was just right place, right time to launch something like that because the NFT hype was really starting to take off. Bored Apes were doing quite well, and there's no way to put the brakes on something once it's out there.
Yeah.
And so it's just like we launched it and it sold out. We were very grateful, and that was fantastic. And then it skyrocketed up from 2.5 ETH to 35 or so within a month and a half or whatever.
It's kind of the double-edged sword of community ownership, right? Is like the good thing is the community truly owns the NFTs and has the freedom to do different things. The bad thing is you can be subject to these market oscillations and things can get too high, right?
Yeah, I mean, and you also have this, it's like the best way, I don't have a perfect analogy for this, but the best way I describe this to people is that aren't in the know, that want to, or they know enough to be like, okay, well, what happened there? Because that was crazy. It was ramp up and now it's back down. And I say, well, we kind of like, it's difficult because you have members of the community come at you and say, I paid 30 ETH for this. Because with every seller, there's a buyer on the other side, right? Yeah. And so you have some people that love you because they sold at 30, and others that are just in the opposite camp. And what we did is we sold them at 2.5, right? And so we sold, the best analogy I had was like we sold a bunch of Vespas out there, and then they started getting traded as Lamborghinis between other users.
Yeah.
And these users are like, well, you sold me a Lamborghini. And we're like, well, we sold a bunch of Vespas. Like, we're providing the warranty on all of them, and we're doing all the great community things that we said we'd do. But, like, it's really challenging because it's not like a Web 2 product where someone's paying $12 for a SaaS product. If you don't like Spotify and you want to jump to Apple Music, it's 2 clicks and you're out, right? There's like, you may say, if you're really on the edge, you may say like, I hate Spotify, right? And it was one tweet and you're done, right? And so in this world, you have people that have a financial interest in these assets, and they are so much more invested emotionally in what you're creating and what you will create and what the outcome that they hope will happen here. And, we have people that, we just had a meetup here about a week ago here locally, and I had someone come up to me and said, like, I'm not in Discord. And just so you know, there's a lot of us out there that aren't in Discord that we understood going into this, like, this is a risky place for us to play, and we're totally cool with it. Let's just have some fun here and let's build something great together. And I was like, oh, I love that. But then you also have the other person that, may have just not realized and, like, got a little over their skis and spent too much on something, and they're really pissed off. So it's a very difficult exercise in community control and how you deal with these different personality types.
Yeah.
Because they can become very toxic within your environment, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because like going back to your experience with creating community software in the in the Web 2 era, obviously there's that kind of community management, toxic elements, et cetera, right, back then, but it's different, I guess, now. I mean, it's different in each
smaller
construction, and so I'm just curious, like how do you view that, the differences?
Yeah, I mean,
Web 2 and Web 3.
In some ways, there was with Dig when I launched that site in 2004. We grew it to about 38 million people, and the majority of them were logged out. So the majority of them just didn't care.
Yeah.
They were just there for like the funny front page stories or whatever it may be. Then you had a subset that because we were based in San Francisco and we just had a tech following, and at the time, there was a lot of left-wing related media that was hitting the front page. And during an election cycle, I had death threats and all that other stuff. So it was equally as bad in terms of like those people were really pissed off at us for a certain reason. But then you just had a lot of users that I would say this cycle is a little bit different just because it does feel like people feel more ownership. They don't know what they own. Some people say, hey, I get it. I own a JPEG. And it's a piece of art, and if the community does great things, like more people want to be a member and hold this art, and that's great, and let's go. Like that's the sentiment of a lot of people, and they just don't understand that it's different, right? And so it's an education process, and you have people just all over the world that you're dealing with. I think that in Web 2, it was like the majority of our traffic was US-based at Dig, and then when you look at kind of like who holds our assets now to the best of our ability, it just seems much more distributed than it was before in Web.
Also, 2004, the internet was just smaller, right? I mean, there were the people using these kinds of sites too, right? It was like desktop,
right?
More
Very
hardcore,
desktop,
probably, and I think a tenth, if not fewer users overall, I think.
Yeah.
So it's just much more, right? I mean, that's one of the differences I think now is just suddenly there's 5 billion people and everything, for better or worse,
right,
propagates out.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of there's some things that you can apply from Web 2 to Web 3, but I think largely it's kind of just we tried to be as nimble as possible and not think any more than kind of 3 months out at a time, just because the space is moving so fast.
Yeah.
Whereas Web 2, that really wasn't the case, and we could kind of plan for larger product development cycles. And so I just think that anyone that has a roadmap, I think roadmaps are pretty dead now. That was like the hot thing to do in Web 3 for a minute. But because the space is so rapidly evolving that we kind of think in terms of months now.
Yeah. What are some, for the folks in this room who are just starting out, like I guess some kind of key learnings so far on the Moonbirds proof journey?
Yeah.
Things you wish you knew?
There are a lot of things. I think that in the early days of at least NFTs as applied to Web 3, there was this idea that we were going to create this new product, this new idea that we would just build completely transparently in public. And that was to a level which we hadn't done previously. And so that was, it was fun. It was fun to kind of hold weekly product, almost not brainstorming sessions, but product updates with your community, both privately and publicly. And people say, look, they're shipping, they're building. Well, and when times are good, people really enjoy that and they love it and they feel like it's part of the ride. But then when something goes sideways or the market takes a turn, then all of a sudden they're your board members. And you have, 1,000 plus angry board members. And it's very difficult because they're used to having a say and they think they just know what's best for you. And they feel really vested in a way that they can be your best brand advocates, which is amazing in good times. But so I think just for us going forward, it's less of a roadmap. It's more about tighter, time-bound iteration and launching new things. Less talking about it up front because talk is pretty cheap, and I think it's more about just under-promising and just dropping things on the community unexpectedly. That has been to feel a little bit better than just over-promising. Or the thing that's really challenging is that over the last, call it 6 months, people don't understand, and you all as builders, you understand this, it's like if you are whiteboarding and you're inviting in your community into your whiteboarding sessions, they almost take what you're saying as reality. But when you're building product, you're going to kill 75% of those ideas. You're just okay, this is these are fun and it's a brainstorming session, and guess what? A week later we feel like these aren't really good ideas anymore, or we changed our thinking on this. And for them, that's gut-wrenching. Because it's well, wait a second, you said this 2 weeks ago in a Twitter space, like, why aren't you building that? And well, it's like, most of the stuff that you build just doesn't ever make it out, and they're very precious new ideas.
Yeah.
So, but if you've never built a product before, you just don't even realize that's the norm. And so I used to believe and hope that we could do more public building, but now I'm back to the old Web 2 days of like, maybe we just keep things a little closer to the chest initially, and then when we have something a little bit more solidified and we're sure that we're going to launch something, we can start to circulate it. And actually, I'm a big fan of, Yuga pioneered this, and I don't know, say pioneer because there's been advisory boards for a long time, but they put together a community council of about like 10 or so members were their top holders.
Yeah.
And they would bounce ideas early and often off of those advisors. And we did the same thing and found it insanely helpful.
So more of a representative democracy versus a direct democracy.
Yeah, so exactly. So you give the community an outlet and saying like, we feel like we have a voice and we can, change these up every quarter so we can swap out members. So a path to being on this, I see that as a community member. Now I have 10 more outlets to give feedback to casually that are my peers and not the company. And also, honestly, it's just like when you're so close to the product building in Web3, just an outlet to have, and I pulled it out of Discord into Telegram because I wanted something that was just disconnected from our normal environment where we operate, and then just have this like more of a casual conversation like, hey, we're getting ready to launch this. Is there anything that we're not thinking through in the right, looking through the right lens? And they've even helped us craft some of the messaging pre-launch that I think has saved us a couple missteps. So I would say that, once you're out in the public, and if you're lucky enough to have a following and a community that is starting to grow, having some of those, and if it feels like it's out of control, like, oh my gosh, like I can't be on Discord 24/7. I'm a founder. I have to build. Like you can deputize some of your best community members to be some of these folks that have a more of a direct channel to you.
Yeah, that makes sense. Maybe I'll ask one more question and then we'll go to the audience here if you guys have questions. So, in the 20 plus years I've been on the internet or working on the internet, I started my first company in 2003. I think you were 2003 also, four. And so that was, for those who don't know, that was a downturn period. That was sort of the post-internet bubble crash period. I was in New York, and the New York Tech Meetup was 10 people or something. I mean, it was relatively small community of people that were still excited about building kind of consumer internet products. And then, of course, 2008 financial crisis, was a big downturn. And then within crypto, and then I think of sort of like you started in crypto 10 years ago or so, and this is the third kind of quote unquote winter. So I think, a natural question for folks here building things is sort of what should they expect? Where are we in the progression of both this technology and sort of the broader, I mean, obviously we're not economists, and I don't even know if economists can predict the economy, but having been through this a bunch of times, like what are some of the kind of lessons learned and things to think about?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most challenging things has to do with just internal morale and mental health.
Yeah.
And just making sure to surround yourself with other founders and creating these bonds here so that you can go and have those conversations over coffee and both say, well, it sucks right now. And be able to either grab a coffee or grab a beer or whatever your beverage choice is and just have those heart-to-hearts and say this is tough. Because it turns out as you've watched so many companies, nothing is just up and to the right. It's the roller coaster with all the loop-de-loops and everything else that comes into being an entrepreneur. And I just think you have to lock arms and find like-minded people to have these conversations with, because it can feel very when it's small like that, it can feel like, am I crazy for wanting to build here? Because it seems like there isn't that many other people building here, and maybe I should go work in AI, and there's going to be another shiny object that pops up, and that's I think another big challenge is just making sure that we can create credible products here in a market that largely grabs the press cycles from the failures, the hacks, the schemes, the meme coins, like you name it. And so that is the thing that is probably the scariest thing to me, is like, I know there's great builders in this space, but we have to kind of like figure out a way to lock arms and elevate the great things that are happening here that are not tied to those negative press cycles. Because I worry that, there's this sentiment where, a couple months ago, I was in an Uber and the Uber driver like asked me what I did for a living. And I remember just not wanting to say NFTs because I just didn't want to get into the conversation where I'm like, I don't want to talk about NFTs right now, And I'm like, well, that's a bad thing. Okay. And I started really picking that apart and saying, well, where have we gone sideways here? And why is there this negative sentiment around NFTs? And, it led me to the, turning them into commodities and the high frequency trading around them. And then just like, a lot of the pump and dump and rugs and all the other things that are going on. And so, yeah, I don't know that I'm answering your question at all other than just having a therapy session with you now. But
I think one of my lessons is that that everything in tech, I think, is ultimately product led. And to give you an example, like after my first startup, my security startup, I did an AI startup in 2008, acquired by eBay in 2011. Back then, we didn't call it AI because AI was actually kind of a dirty word. Because for those who don't know, neural networks' first paper was 1943. Alan Turing's famous Turing test paper in 1950. And then there were lots and lots of kind of quote summers and winters. And by the time I was involved, AI had been this thing that was just sort of this notoriously overhyped thing. And so actually the thing we called it machine learning, if you go back and look at it, that was the machine learning that's sort of like the, serious thing and the rebrand.
Yeah.
It's like I always think of it when people are like, let's rebrand NFTs collectibles or something. Like,
right.
And my answer is, by the way, smartphones, like I had friends doing smartphone startups in the 90s. Like, for those, the BlackBerry, of course. Before that, there was the Trio and the Palm Pilot and like General Magic, and like it goes back on and on. And at some point, smartphones, 2004 or 5-ish, you'd sort of eye roll, like I'm doing a mobile gaming startup. I had a friend who quit mobile at that point because it was like it had been 10 years, it's never going to happen. This is all leading up, of course, to the iPhone in 2007. And that's what changed it, though, right? Is like the iPhone. Like AI looks very real now. What changed it is ChatGPT, right? And so you have these kind of breakout moments. And to me, that's kind of always, you said this too, but like the key thing is, the media side matters, but really ultimately it's about people in this room, other entrepreneurs, you building great products, great experiences that just kind of like offer overwhelming evidence that there's something interesting here, and in doing so, reclaim these words that otherwise might have had a negative connotation, like AI, like smartphones, like NFTs.
Yeah, there's certain technologies where when I look back, I remember when I first invested in Tesla way back in the day, and it was because there was a bus in San Francisco going up one of the really steep hills, and it was like really couldn't make it up the hill. This was really struggling. And I remember just like electric cars just having that sound that just of no friction, and just being like, well, this is the future. Like, of course this is where things are going. And there's like this like light bulb moment that clicks. And I had the same feeling with crypto when, I just thought about if you're going to start a country today from scratch, you're going to go out and buy printing presses? Of course you're not. Everyone has a smartphone, right? And a distributed ledger, like permissionless, like makes a ton of sense. Like, you would do that route. Of course you would. So there's nothing about the underlying technology is broken. For NFTs or crypto, it is waiting for that moment, right? And so that's what's being built by this whole team here and hopefully by us as well. And so, when we think about digital art and collectibles, does it make sense to have them on the blockchain? Absolutely. Like there's so much to love and so many advantages that you get over a physical object. And also the interplay between the two is also really fascinating. So there are so many very exciting things that are being built right now that I think in the next few years, people are going to be like, oh, why didn't we always do it like that,
That's great. Awesome. Should we do questions?
Hey, Kevin. Brendan with Kiki. We're at the cross-section of beauty and blockchain. So I think my question goes to adoption for a community that isn't necessarily traditionally associated with Web3 or blockchain. So we just launched yesterday, actually, and part of our launch is a World Pass NFT. It's a soulbound token connected to your membership account. Do you have any advice in terms of creating an approach that is interesting to a wider audience that may not be familiar with Web3 in order to convince them that it's worth engaging with that side of the business because of the promise of potential future use and benefit?
Yeah, that's a good question. So can you tell me a little bit more about the product itself, though? Like, what do you actually offer people?
Yeah, so with much more than just an NFT membership, so we're building a platform that allows people to co-create products together. So right now what that looks like is voting on products, earning rewards.
On like makeup colors and things, right? Is that right?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Nail polish first out of the gate, actually. And then all that information is tied to your World Pass, and there's tiers of those that you can level up and get different types of perks the more you engage with the platform. Ultimately, we have some really big, exciting ideas of how we want to look at the co-creation model of products, but that's what we're doing right now.
Gotcha. Okay. I mean, it's challenging in that I'm curious if you know, what the intersection of your kind of target demographic and Web3 wallet usage looks like. It might be on the smaller side. And so if that's the case, like, you know, what are the rough edges that you can sand down for that audience to make onboarding as easy and seamless as possible? And so I think about, you know, some of these services that do instant wallet creation and just where, yeah, it's like it's a no-brainer. It's like, it's almost like the technology behind the scenes just disappears. And then that's a bonus, like a value add when they learn about it later down the road, right? When it becomes more and more mainstream.
So kind of the magic link kind of thing where it's behind the scenes.
Yeah, it's like what Reddit's doing right now, to be honest. Like I have a buddy over at Reddit, I was just talking to him yesterday, and he's like, we have so many NFT users, and the vast majority of them have no clue that they're actually holding these as NFTs, right?
Yeah.
And it's just because it's all the magic's done behind the scenes, and like as this becomes more and more of a popular technology, and there's ways to secure it on your phone and transfer, like they'll just like slowly expose the feature set underneath it, and you won't even have to think about it as being like, oh, what is this gas thing? Or what is this, you know, like all these weird foreign terms that in crypto word is like, of course there's gas. You talk to anyone on the street and say, hey, how much gas did you pay to move your NFT? They're like, what the hell are you talking about, right? So we just have to make sure we're not too in the weeds on this stuff and I'm sure you'll get that from a lot of your like interviews with your early customers.
The other thing I would add is, Kevin alluded to this with Dig, is that in the Web 2 model, you always had this sort of 1-10-99 rule of like 1% of the users are hardcore and create content, 99% are passive, and maybe 10% are kind of in the middle, like curating, for example. And it might be something similar here, where some small subset, I don't know the product well enough, so forgive me, but I'm just guessing, but like some small subset is actively engaged, holds an NFT or some other thing, and maybe there's a broader group who has a more passive engagement, maybe they're just buying the product, but then there's a path to kind of gradually engage people, right, through the funnel, which is sort of the Web 2 playbook, right? So you have the bigger group, maybe you start off on Instagram just viewing, but then over time you start liking, and then over time you start creating content, and someday you're a full-time content creator or something, you know?
I'm really glad you guys are saying that because that's the approach that we're taking.
Yeah.
So to claim your World Pass, you do not need to create a wallet, you do not need to pay gas, anything of that nature. In order to vote on products, product attributes, you don't have to hold a World Pass. We're actually looking at a model to encourage people to claim that pass so that they can vote on products themselves that we're going to be launching. And so the idea is that if you hold this pass, it's essentially a much stronger membership card and perk platform that we can automatically apply things to you, do drops that provide value, and the whole time for the non-crypto user, they're just like, okay, I have this great thing that is adding value to my life and to my product experience, so I want to engage with it more and more.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's a long-tail journey, but we're excited about
Cool.
it.
Awesome.
Yeah, the other thing, well, congrats on launching. The other thing, too, it's probably worth mentioning is there's a lot of DAOs that you may want to go into and figure out where you can tap into and find your audience. That might be a good place to go and find customers as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Emmanuel, I run Shield Security. We're a Web3 security company building security tools for NFT projects and Web3 teams. So my question is, it's a bit of a follow-on, I think, to what Chris asked at the end during the Q&A. How do you think about focus and strategy in the bear market versus the bull market? You know, how does it differ in terms of your approach to that.
Yeah, I mean, for us, well, it's interesting. When I think about just we're a little bit in a different position in that we kind of went through this cycle and ramped up. So we've got some pre-existing products that have a big following that we need to kind of take care of that user base. So, but I would say for most of the startups that I see getting funded now, it's about capital preservation and keeping as lean as possible, and just making sure they have a couple of years of runway so they can just keep building. But that said, for us, we want to. There's two lanes. Like we have the art and collectibles model that we can go after, and we know is going to be like there'll be another Christie's or Sotheby's that will be built that's more digital first, that we can go after that market. But also at the same time, we don't want to just go and try and say, hey, there's a one-to-one translation between an existing kind of brick and mortar company that we want to make on the digital side. I think that's pretty boring. And so we want to have those kind of like internal hackathons that we're not done experimenting, and we're putting together like a good, decent chunk of our time on the product development cycle to make sure that we're trying the bigger, bolder ideas. And just because we had some initial upfront success doesn't mean we can lean on that for the next couple of years worth of success. Like the NFT market, I'm confident is here to stay for the long term. Is the PFP market here to stay for the long term? I really couldn't tell you. So it's like we can't just lean on that and say just because we had the last 6 months, we brought in X number of dollars of revenue, that's the path forward. So it's just continuing to be nimble, I think is probably, and not plan too far out, I think for us is our strategy. I don't know if that's the right one, but it's kind of the one we're going with here.
I think too, like I would just add that, and this is not sort of cope, I guess, I really believe that these downturns are by far the best time to be building and doing a startup. I think with the caveat that you need to preserve capital, and we need to raise capital if you don't have it, and you need to preserve it. So like, and that's trickier in these markets. It's just harder to get money in. But if you can manage through that part of it, these are just over and over again, these are the times in which a lot of the great startups are created. And frankly, like not having all the noise in the market is just clarifying and lets you focus and lets you kind of build better. I think probably the quality of the communities getting built now are going to be better. I mean, like that early CryptoPunks community you talked about, like everyone who bought a CryptoPunks back then, they were like serious people, like who really believed, who went on to kind of a diaspora style, do interesting things. So I think with the caveat, I also think I think the hiring market's pretty good right now for crypto. I think, there are these pockets of other hot areas like AI, but generally like, it's like it's not like as crazy as it was 2 years ago when everyone was just sort of hopping around. And the problem with bull markets is you just get a lot of transient behavior, both from like recruiting, customers, just like it's less authentic. I don't know. So I think with the big caveat being managing your like the number one advice I have for startups in downturns is managing their runway. And specifically, we just don't know. Like if you look at it outside of the Great Depression, like economic downturn, there's been there's been I think 15 economic downturns since then or something like that. Most of them, I think outside the Great Depression, none have lasted more than 3, maybe 4 years. But just the uncertainty around that, like how do you manage through that? How do you manage your psychology? Kevin made the point about kind of, it's very important and frankly all markets for entrepreneurs to manage like work-life balance, like psychology. Like there's just a lot of challenges. I will tell you, having been involved with a lot of startups, that's probably, the majority have serious issues around that. So just kind of getting through that, building a great team, staying focused, building a great user base, preserving capital. I don't know. But I think like my strong instinct, and we're behaving this way as investors, is this is going to be a great period to be building in crypto.
Awesome. Agreed. Yeah, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Hi, Kevin. Thank you for the talk. I'm Jay from ETHID. We provide a universal domain that works both on Web 2 and Web 3. So we mint a domain like kevin.ethid that is both an ENS name, and because it has .id, or Indonesia, it actually evaluates on as a website. And we pair that along with a Squarespace for Web3. So it's a drag and drop interface to create a crypto website that anyone could do. My question is, thank you for being candid about the experience with building in public with proof. For most of us here, we're fairly early on in our journey, and we're building in relative anonymity. I'm curious, what are some benefits that we might not fully appreciate that of building in anonymity?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a fine balance because you don't want to be too quiet. Like I think it's if you're just in a crazy bull market, like people were loving building in public. Like and it was just like it was a great way. We would see 1,000+ people come into our Twitter Spaces and all be talking about it and retweeting it and getting super excited. And I think it's important that at least someone on your team gets out there when the time is right, and you can have some type of public persona out there in terms of how it can help propel and market your product in a way that is really useful. I think where it gets out of hand is when you give the keys to the castle, or the perceived keys to the castle, over to the community, where they think that they can help guide the direction of your company and they know best. It's kind of it's all on how you kind of position that, though. So what have you done to date? Like, have you done any public speaking on what we've been building, or?
Yes, so we've released out to the ENS community. It's a fairly enclosed community that has already a passion for Web3 domains. But we haven't really expanded beyond that. So I guess it's thinking about the timing of the next move.
Right. Gotcha.
It's interesting though, because like Ethereum builds in public. Like there are examples. I wonder is that because it's infrastructure or it's been around longer? It does seem to work for some people. I just wonder.
Yeah, they have a good system for proposing changes, right? Like that's all
The IP
structured.
stuff.
Yeah, which is quite nice. And most of us don't have that. We just now got enough DAO tooling to where people can come in and actually propose things via the DAO, which is more for it's less about controlling the company. It's more about how they'd like to see offshoot projects get funded.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I just wonder if the lesson is don't build as much in public, if the lesson is representative democracy, the product council, or the lesson is just better systems. I don't know. I don't have an answer. I just wonder.
Yeah. It would be. I'd love to. I think your point about now's the right time to build. It's so much better than 6 months ago, because 6 months ago, if you'd launched something, it would just go straight to the moon. Or let's call it a year ago. It would just go
You had
straight up and to the right.
real feedback.
No real feedback, and just then you got a bunch of pissed off users when they're upside down when it all comes down, crashing down. So it's like actually really nice because you'll have a core community of people that are really there for the right reasons.
And that's true of Bitcoin, Ethereum, isn't it? Dogecoin, like those are all people that came in during down markets for the most part. So they were true believers. So you had that core nucleus of true believers, right? I do think that's a big part of why those communities have stayed healthier.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the great talk. I'm Nikita, founder of Chain Patrol. We protect communities from scammers and phishing. Let's say there's a fake Moonbirds page. We can have wallets like Coinbase, MetaMask, and others have them blocked within minutes. So any user visiting them will get a big scary warning to don't mint here. And my question was, what was really interesting to me is like your kind of vision of how NFTs are going to be used in the future. The wine example, I've been looking a lot at like real estate and other ways that like NFTs can be tied to like real world assets. I'm really interested in like what are some of the breakout cases you're thinking of like NFTs beyond profile pictures, and like how do you see the average user like the most exciting things you've seen that might be NFT use cases? Yeah,
it's a great question. I struggle to find really solid examples. For me, it's I think that there are certain verticals of art that have emerged that are obviously like whether it be AI or generative, like that are now going to be kind of household name collectible type, durable new verticals that will stay and be accepted into the canon of all great things art. I think that's a no-brainer. In terms of there being the we're still learning and playing with what membership means in NFTs and whether or not that is something that is sustainable and really like it's a little backwards because in some sense membership in the world of NFTs as it exists today is like it really comes down to the person that has the biggest wallet, and that's not necessarily the best person for your community. And so I worry that, when you think about membership as it applies to the things that we do in real life, it's often an application process. It's often like, as you all know from being here in this room, there is some kind of clearing house to get into a club or community, and we just don't have that. And so I think it's just such early days for Web3 when it comes to all these other applications of NFTs. There's going to be some great businesses to be built in this. I think when we were doing it initially, it was just like, okay, here's a fun idea, let's just launch it in the spirit of like, good idea, get it out the door in 3 weeks and see what happens. And everyone went crazy. We didn't really take our time to think through all the edge cases and what might be the negative consequences that we hadn't really just considered. Now you're going to see a regrouping, and I think we'll have better products because of it. I see there was a startup I was looking at the other day that we were considering deploying into our Discord, and it does some really interesting things where it takes a look and rewards members of your community not for just positive contributions inside of Discord, but also a whole slew of different things that they can do externally as well. And one of them is it uses AI to detect whether or not they're actually using your NFT as their PFP, and then rewards them for doing so and keeping that as like a badge of honor. And there was just like all these probably 10 to 15 little metrics that we had never considered, baking into what it means to have a really healthy, active participant in your community. And I think gone are the days, hopefully in the near future, that everyone has the same microphone, because it's really toxic when you get into Discord and you can have someone in there that can just control the entire conversation, and then you ask them, hey, can I see your wallet address? And then they send it, and they bought into the project a week ago, or they're just not committed. They bought in actually just to have a voice and to be a detractor from the project. And so I think we need to do a little bit better in figuring out how to elevate the best voices. I know that's a little bit of a rant all over the place, but I think NFTs are going to. We went into like this rapid launch and just throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. And now it's like I'm seeing some great products being built around that mess of what all fell to the floor.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the legal frameworks around it are important too, right? Like the CC0 with the Moonbirds and, with real estate, tying it to like actually like a deed for a house is. I think there's a lot of interesting developments there.
Yeah, that stuff is really challenging for me because I feel like the more that government is involved, and so the more kind of regulatory hurdles there are in place, I feel like those will be the last to fall, unless it's just so efficient and world-changing that everyone says we must do this, and they force the hand of regulators. I think of Uber like this. Like, remember how illegal it was? Like, you had to have a taxi medallion to do anything. And you remember how this all unfolded. It was just like, but it was the demand of the people that said, I want this, taxis suck. Yeah. And then they forced regulators to actually make it happen in these different areas. Yeah. That was a big fight for a few years.
That was, yes, it was. And Airbnb too, by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, Kevin.
Hey.
I'm JP. I'm building Friends, and Friends, we're a Web3 messaging app that's powered by crypto identity and payment rails. So actually was an early user of Dig, and I still remember like what it meant to get, dug, was that the right term? Where you would get this flurry of activity on your product, right? And you clearly figured out a way to unlock the power of community there. And I remember learning about Proof on the podcast interview you had with Tim Ferriss, like this is 2021. And I'm just curious, like, as someone who's built so many community-based products, how do you think about seeding that community, solving the cold start problem, and then curating the community so that it becomes something net positive as it scales?
Yeah, it's a great question. I always think about how can you approach this with adding value right from the get-go. And so you'll see a pretty common theme with a lot of the things that I launch where it's let's get out there and just enter into the community that is not someone just there to make a splash, but really just get buy-in and trust. And so, with the Modern Finance podcast around crypto or the Proof podcast, it was like no advertisements, nothing I was trying to sell you, none of my own projects. It was like build on the community side and like stand out as someone that could be somewhat of a force for good inside of this and prove that you're there to like be a good citizen of the Web3 community first. And then once we had enough people, I remember when we hit the kind of like, call it 75 to 100,000 people listening per episode, I was like, okay, well, these people are clearly really happy with the product we've created so far. Now, there's some products that we could layer on top of this that might be interesting to take this one step further. And so we had this built-in base and this good loyalty built up with this audience of people that we could then parlay into like something meaningful, whether it be the Moonbirds launch or the Proof Collective launch. And so it was just like, I think a lot of this was giving value back right away. Gary Vee did a very similar approach actually with VeeFriends. As crazy as the art was, I still give him kind of shit for that. But like, I think that the thing that he did is he taught people how to use MetaMask. He had this massive following on Instagram, and he created a bunch of series of videos on like, this is what you need to do to prepare yourself for Web3. And it was like him walking people through step by step by step. And he bought up a bunch of great, like he onboarded so many people into Web3 that would have never collected his NFTs, right? Like he just they weren't in that world. And so that bought him a lot of goodwill there as well. So I've just encouraged everyone in this room to think about when you're attracting these first customers, like it's not about extracting value from them initially. It's like really providing value add in some capacity.
It's kind of like building a culture of generosity. Where
Exactly.
everyone is contributing. Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, thank you for the talk. David from Discov. I'm building a Web3 native social app. I'm curious what you would be working on if you weren't focused on Proof right now.
Oh, gosh. Well, I really actually like a lot of the things that I spend my kind of nights playing around with how we can use AI to create code that becomes art. And so that to me is really interesting. I'm not talking prompt to image outputs, but prompt to code to generative images. And so it's a slightly different than what's being done out there. And I don't know if you can productize that in some capacity to create a unique product that might produce art. Like, is there a Photoshop to be made around coding? I don't know. Like, it's interesting because like I think that computer science degrees are going to die in the next 5 years. I just like the code is just. I studied computer science in school. I dropped out, and I know like now I have AI as a buddy. And it is just so good at filling in all the blanks and helping me with the syntax and there's things that I just like don't have the time to look up. And it's like completing my sentences for me. And I'm like, wow, like if I can code, watch out. That means anybody can. And so I'm just like, I'm fascinated with.
I think though, my mental model is it won't obviate the need for a computer science degree, but it will change what you do, which is you'll be more kind of at the orchestration, curation layer.
Right.
As a, like you'll be choosing among different pieces of code.
That feels more creative
and
to
putting
me.
it. Yeah, no, I think it's a good. I think it'll be really unlock creativity.
I think it might. Well, it allows us to iterate just so much faster.
I mean, I used to code a lot, and just as people know, like a lot of it is just the reason I stopped coding is a lot of it becomes tedious, and
Yes.
you just looking stuff up on Stack Overflow and debugging, and that's why the AI stuff is amazing. I don't think it removes the need for like architectural orchestration thoughts and creative thoughts, right? I don't know. I think if anything, it's an accelerant for that, and I don't know. So
Well, I mean, I guess the definition of a computer science degree might change and evolve. It'll probably be less math focused and more of the orchestration and creative focus.
I think an interesting question too is what will it do I'm sorry to take off topic, but just one thing we didn't really talk about it is, when also you can generate any art instantly too. What will that do? I think it will make the human connection, the authenticity, the community, the provenance 10 times more valuable, and therefore make things like NFTs much more valuable, because and it also relates to CC0. Like, it's going to be, I think the copyright thing is going to be forced by the fact that it's just art is so abundant,
Right.
and that and you'll just have so much of it that it'll become more important that you're building a community and the human connection. What does it mean, and what is the humanity behind it? Anyways, it's a longer conversation, but
I think it's going to make creatives just at least 10x more productive, because it gives you, like, your best brainstorming friend where you're like, okay, this is the person I love to just like shoot the shit with and like try out new ideas on. It gives you like 100 of those.
Yeah.
Like, and you can just go and iterate back and forth with it so rapidly. Like, I can get new algorithms for generative art, it takes about a minute and 20 seconds to produce something from ChatGPT. And like, just the refinement and iteration, it's so fast. It's so much fun. Anyway, that's what I'd be working on, is probably, and I probably will start to work on that at Proof, is like, how does that apply to all the things we're doing with NFTs?
yeah, should be a really exciting time for generative art.
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
How's it going, Kevin? My name's Adam. I'm building Bello. We're building growth tools to help creators sell more NFTs. One thing that I want to learn about sort of your role at Moonbirds is how integral is on-chain data in the day-to-day of operating Moonbirds, whether it be when preparing for drops, managing IP, managing the community. Like, how do you look at on-chain data in sort of the day-to-day operations?
Yeah, definitely in a more sophisticated way than we had been. I mean, it was initially just kind of doing analytics queries that we would spit back to say, who are these people? What are they holding? Who are our biggest collectors to pay attention to? And there's been probably a half dozen or so startups that have started to fill and answer those questions. And so it's not us writing queries any longer. It's just us playing with these products where, you just paste in your contract address and, auth in your Twitter, and it starts giving you insights into all these different collectors and their habits that you would have never known before. So a lot of that tooling is being created now, or has been, and will just get better with time. But I think it's just, if you talk to Frank from Dgods, who I absolutely love, I would say probably a big chunk of their team does nothing but just look at the data. And so he has this like team that his engineers that he calls it, like, it's almost like they're whisperers. Like, they'll say, when like you see the president enter a room and like they have someone that kind of whispers in there, like, oh, that's so and so, pay attention to them. Like, he has that, but like through on-chain data, and so he knows exactly when to engage with certain customers on Twitter. And so he'll be like, okay, this person's sentiment has been going a little bit sideways on Dgods. I should probably interject and have a conversation with them today. Or like, there's like these tools that they've built out that allow them to preemptively reach out to problem members, or, it's insane what's going on in the back end. So I would say it's more and more important every day.
Cool. And then as just a quick follow-up, when you're preparing for a drop, any sort of metrics that come to mind that you eyeball in preparation for the big campaign?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, in preparing for a drop, the good news is that we have a community of people that we're already serving. So before, it used to be, using pre-mint to kind of gauge the excitement around a potential drop. But even that isn't really working well these days. They'll have I was talking to Brendan the other day, and they'll have a mint that 50,000 people will sign up for, and then you actually say, hey, you want a spot, and it's like 10% of the people that won the spot actually show up to redeem it, right? And so it's a really good question as to how we figure out this problem of, yesterday is a great example where I just think all bets are off right now in using data to try to prepare for drops. Like, yesterday on the homepage of OpenSea was a drop that was free, and it took like 5 hours to sell out because people didn't want to pay the gas fees. And I was just like, okay, we've hit bottom now. Like, this is good. This is good. So it was crazy. It was like those would have been something that would have been, if you're on the front page of OpenSea, it would have been gone in 10 seconds if it was free. So I don't know that you can use data on the drop side as much these days, or if you can, if you have something that you're hiding, please tell me, because we don't have any good way to predict anything.
We'll be in touch. Yeah.
Sweet.
Thank you.
Thanks for the talk. I'm Nico from Skylab. We are building primitives for on-chain games. So essentially, we just set the physics and the initial rules for the open world, and anyone can build games on top of it. And we are building games on top of it as well. And we actually include Moonbird as one of the pilots in our first open world.
Awesome.
Yep. So I'm curious, like, what's your thought on the future of these communities? Because I think we did the math. Like, these communities collectively at the peak has over 500 billion values of all the blue chip NFTs. So like, 500 million. So what is the activities that these communities are engaging in, and when people gather together, what do they do together?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I would say that a few things on the future of these communities. I think that we're going to learn what the price discovery in this new bottom is going to be really healthy for the entire ecosystem. Just because no one really knew how to value anything in the hype cycle. And if you walk into a gallery and you go and you found an unknown artist, you can find something really impressive, I'm sure, within a 10-block radius for a few $100s, right? And so we have this conversation internally a lot where we're like, okay, well, what does it mean to value an actual NFT? Like, how do you figure out what that's worth? And I say that as it applies to community because I think a more stable, natural price appreciation of these collectibles over time is just healthier for the ecosystem, which will lead to a better community. So for us, a lot of the conversation is with the true believers is like, okay, we're here now. I hold a Moonbird, it's worth a few $1,000s. Like, okay, maybe this is where we should have started. Like, maybe these things should have been worth, $500 or $700, like, from the get-go, and that's kind of how we slowly build from here. And so the community now, I would say, is actually, the diehards are really actually pumped to feel like we've kind of hit bottom in some ways. And now it's like the strongest of the community are coming together to kind of lock arms and say, okay, we build from here together. And that feels really good. It feels healthy and sustainable. I would say that it's a really important piece for us, and one of the things that we've noticed is that the best conversations are still happening in real life. And so I would highly recommend that a lot of your initial gatherings get done in real life for these real bonds to get set up. And we always see a halo effect in real life events, not in terms of floor price, but in terms of just the conversation on Discord. Because you'll have these like, oh, you're so-and-so user. Oh, I thought you were an asshole and now we're kind of friends. And then that kind of like extends into your virtual environment. Whereas if you're just yelling at someone with some random PFP, it's just like, there's not that same, I don't know, I just feel like we're a lot healthier. I remember having a conversation with Zuckerberg back in 2005 when Dig was really starting to take off. We were about the same size in traffic, and now not so much. But he was saying how he used real names on Facebook. And I was like, well, we use usernames. Like, why are you using real names? Everyone uses usernames, And he's like, no, like, trust me, like, real names are best because people are more themselves when they actually use their real identity. And I don't know if that's held up because there's some pretty bad people on Facebook. But I would say that these IRL events are just so, especially during this market, when people are feeling beat up, they need to see that there's life still happening. And it's always a positive thing when we get together in real life.
Oh, and just a quick follow-up. What do they talk about when they gather together?
Honestly,
because they don't know each other, right?
Yeah, it was just more like a lot of our conversation is around art. And so it's like, what are you collecting? What are you into? Oh, this is we were talking about this before we came up here. You said the average mint price on Manifold now is like sub $10 or something like that. And like, so a lot of our people that are getting together are
Which
talking.
is a very good sign, I think, because it's authentic kind of patronage-like behavior, not,
Exactly.
not speculative behavior.
so it's like a lot of that where it's like, oh, I picked up this great piece of art for $100 or for $75. And so it's like, it's more back to that grassroots like vibes than it is about the hype vibes, which is, for me, is really, really awesome. So it's a lot of conversation around art and collectibles at these gatherings.
Got it. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Hi, great talk. I'm Marielle from Mentaport. We're the geolocation platform for Web3. We're an infrastructure company doing location-aware smart contracts to bring location applications to Web3. My question is, what's your advice on onboarding Web2 companies? For example, we were actually also talking to a wine company, and then FTX happened, and there it went. So what is your advice?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the majority of them, the bigger companies, have at least one internal Web3 champion that you just have to find out who that person is. We just launched an integration that we did last week with Spotify, and it's because they have this little tiny team internally that is like, let's play, and let's do token-gated content, and let's just see what's going to happen here. And a lot of the bigger brands that we're talking to, whether it be the designer luxury brands or a lot of the household names, whether it be sporting or apparel or you name it, there seem to be this like little pockets of like 3 to 5 people that are at these companies that have somewhat of a blessing from executive management to say, okay, go play here. We don't know what this might look like. And so for us, it's been, let's not try and ask for the world, but let's just do something that is meaningful for both of us, that we can both put a win up on the board, and that we both learn from together collectively. And so it's not like, hey, Nike, can you go make a Moonbird shoe? It's like, hey, Nike, can we just do this like fun little side drop together that, that will benefit both communities, that isn't you producing something physical, that, so it's like, it's really understanding that they're as scared as you are about this whole space, probably even more so. And it's just playing in a way that makes them comfortable initially so that they, can just not feel like they're going to put themselves out there where they might end up in a bad PR cycle.
I would add to that, in addition to finding the right person within each organization, you can also have, as a startup, you don't need every customer. And so finding the right customers, meaning the right companies, generally in most industries, right, there's sort of 1 or 2 kind of tech forward-leaning players. Maybe they're not always the number 1, maybe the number 2, and they want to use tech to get up ahead. And enterprise software, they have this concept of lighthouse customers, which are kind of the, in the insurance industry, everybody knows that X insurance company is always on the cutting edge. And, in each of these worlds, right, they have their own conferences, their own, social media. You don't have to have everyone as your customer initially, right? You can go and you can not only choose the right people within the organization, but choose the right organizations as well.
Thank you.
It's funny, oddly enough, like conferences like Consensus and others have been really helpful.
Good.
Because we've gone there and you do these meetups and you go to, the Art Blocks meetup out there, and you go to all these like little gatherings, and you just bump into people that are working at these big brands that are in the industry that are curious. And you're like, oh, like, and if you've made a splash enough to where they'll recognize your name, like, hey, I did Moonbirds. Oh, we know Moonbirds. And then all of a sudden a conversation and dialogue starts around that. And you just like, I didn't realize you were into Web3. And it's such a great place to like these smaller little niche events to kind of network and figure out what brands are curious,
Yeah, I think especially in a remote world, where a lot of people have gone remote, these in-person events become that much more important, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And like whether it's Consensus or like Ethereum has a lot of great meetups, and it just self-selects. And as you were saying earlier, like we all love the internet, we work on the internet, but there is no human bonding replacement for in-person interactions, right? So, great.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that, Kevin and Chris. Please join us in thanking
Thanks,
Kevin.
Thank you.